They say a mother's love should feel safe, like a place of comfort where a child can grow without fear. A foundation built on trust, emotional security, and understanding. But this story presents a very different reality, one where that sense of safety is replaced with emotional pressure, confusion, and psychological conflict that slowly builds over time. What people witnessed in the courtroom was not just a routine legal hearing. It carried a weight that went far beyond legal arguments or formal testimony. It felt like a deeply emotional unfolding of long-hidden pain, finally being spoken out loud after years of silence. Every detail shared inside that room seemed to shift the atmosphere, as if everyone present understood that something deeply personal, and potentially painful, was about to be revealed. Tina Campbell, widely known for her strong faith, her music career, and her public image as a devoted mother and spiritual figure, sat quietly as her daughter, Leah Simone, took the stand. From the very beginning, the energy in the room changed. The courtroom, usually controlled and procedural, felt heavier, more tense, and emotionally charged. It was as if an invisible line had been crossed, moving the case from a legal matter into something far more personal and human. As Leah began to speak, recordings were introduced and played in court. These recordings allegedly captured private moments and conversations between her and her mother. The voice heard in those audio clips was described by those present as harsh, controlling, and emotionally intense. An image that sharply contrasted with the public persona many people associated with Tina Campbell. The introduction of these recordings immediately shifted the mood in the courtroom. Curiosity turned into shock, and shock slowly developed into discomfort. People listening reacted visibly, as the audio suggested a pattern of emotional tension within the household. The recordings became the focal point of attention, not just for their content, but for the stark contrast they presented against Tina Campbell's widely respected public image. Throughout the playback, Tina Campbell appeared visibly affected. Her emotional reactions were difficult for observers to interpret in a single way. Some people viewed her response as a sign of regret or emotional overwhelm, while others believed it reflected the strain of having deeply personal and private family matters exposed in a public courtroom setting. Either way, it was clear that the situation was emotionally intense for everyone involved. Lee's testimony painted a picture of her childhood and teenage years as emotionally complex and often difficult. She described living in an environment where emotional reactions could be sudden and unpredictable, requiring her to constantly adjust her behavior in order to avoid conflict. According to her account, this created a sense of walking on emotional eggshells, where stability felt conditional rather than consistent. She also explained that growing up around reality television cameras created a strange contrast in her life. On camera, there appeared to be structure, expectations, and a controlled environment. However, away from the cameras, she described things as unpredictable, emotionally draining, and at times overwhelming. This contrast, she said, contributed to a growing sense of confusion about what was real and what was being presented publicly. Over time, Leah stated that she began to feel isolated within her own family environment. She described feeling blamed for certain emotional tensions and situations, as though her own feelings were secondary or less important. According to her testimony, she often felt that her role in the family was not to express herself freely, but rather to comply with expectations and maintain harmony, even at the expense of her own emotional needs. One of the most serious aspects of her testimony involved her relationship with her father, Teddy. Leah claimed that over time, her connection with him was gradually damaged through influence and communication within the family environment. She described being told negative things about him, which led her to believe that he was not actively interested in her life or well-being. According to her account, this created emotional confusion and distance between them. She said she grew up with a version of reality in which her father appeared absent by choice, only to later question whether that narrative had been accurate. As she matured, she began to reconsider many of the beliefs she had been raised with, especially regarding her father's role in her life. She further testified that her attempts to reconnect or build a relationship with him were often discouraged, leaving her emotionally torn. This placed her in a painful position of feeling caught between both parents, uncertain about where the truth lay, and unsure of whom she could fully trust. During her testimony, Leah described the emotional consequences of this experience in greater detail. She said she often felt trapped, as though she had no independent space to form her own understanding of her family history. Over time, this created emotional stress, internal conflict, and confusion about her own memories and lived experiences. As she continued speaking, the courtroom grew noticeably quiet. The seriousness of her words created a heavy silence that filled the space. Many in attendance appeared visibly affected by the emotional weight of her testimony. It was no longer just a legal statement. It felt like a deeply personal account of lived emotional struggle being revealed in real time. Tina Campbell's reaction became increasingly emotional during this part of the proceedings. At certain moments, she appeared overwhelmed, and the tension in the room became so intense that the court had to briefly pause to allow the situation to settle. The emotional strain was evident on both sides, reflecting the complexity of the moment. Outside the courtroom, reactions were sharply divided. Some people believed the situation reflected a deeply complicated family dynamic that could not be fully understood from the outside. They argued that public judgment should be cautious, especially in matters involving private family relationships. Others, however, expressed serious concern after hearing the recordings and testimony. They felt that Lee's account pointed toward long-term emotional harm and psychological strain. This group viewed her testimony as an important example of the hidden emotional struggles that can exist behind closed doors, even within families that appear strong or successful in public. Social media quickly became a central space for discussion. Conversations, debates, and emotional reactions spread rapidly. Many users expressed support for Leah, stating that she deserved to be heard, believed, and understood. They saw her testimony as an act of courage in speaking about painful personal experiences. At the same time, others defended Tina Campbell, emphasizing that family relationships are often complex and cannot be fully understood from external perspectives. They cautioned against drawing conclusions based solely on emotional testimony and selectively presented evidence. As the testimony continued over multiple sessions, the emotional weight of the situation appeared to increase rather than decrease. Leah described ongoing struggles with communication, trust, and emotional stability within her family relationships. She explained that the impact of her upbringing did not end in childhood, but continued to affect her well into adulthood. By the end of this stage of proceedings, the courtroom atmosphere had transformed completely. What began as a formal legal environment now felt like a space filled with emotional reflection, unresolved tension, and deeply personal history. The air in the room felt heavy, as though every word spoken carried years of unspoken pain behind it. At one point, Leah was described as visibly shaking, holding onto the edge of the table tightly, her knuckles turning pale from the pressure. The emotional intensity in the room was so strong that even minor movements felt amplified in the silence. In a later moment, the prosecution presented a video from an older interview featuring Tina Campbell. In the clip, she appeared calm and composed, speaking about themes such as faith, forgiveness, healing, and personal growth while seated comfortably in a relaxed setting. This public image stood in stark contrast to the private audio recordings that had been played earlier in the courtroom. The difference between these two portrayals created a striking emotional contrast for those watching. One version reflected a peaceful, faith-centered public figure, while the other suggested a more complex and emotionally difficult private reality. For many observers, this contrast was unsettling, as it challenged the consistency of the image they had previously associated with her. Public reaction intensified as the case developed further. Discussions spread across social platforms and media outlets, with increasing emotional engagement from audiences. Some psychology and family behavior commentators began analyzing the situation in broader terms, describing it as an example of high-conflict family dynamics and emotional control within parent-child relationships. The conversation gradually shifted beyond celebrity focus and into larger social themes. It became about childhood emotional development, psychological impact, and the courage required to speak about painful family experiences involving authority figures or public personalities. As more details emerged, public opinion began to shift. Some individuals who initially supported Tina became quieter or more uncertain. while attention increasingly focused on understanding the emotional experiences described by Leah. Many people began to interpret her story not as a simple family disagreement, but as a long-term emotional struggle with lasting psychological effects. At the same time, a portion of the audience remained neutral, emphasizing that only those directly involved truly understood the full reality of the situation. They cautioned against drawing absolute conclusions based on partial information presented in a public legal setting. One of the most emotional parts of Lee's testimony centered on her reflection on childhood experiences that she felt were lost or overshadowed. She spoke about birthdays, school milestones, and teenage years that, instead of being remembered with joy, were filled with emotional stress and pressure. According to her, she often felt unable to fully experience childhood in a normal way. She described constantly adjusting her behavior based on emotional expectations and external pressures. This created a sense that she was not simply living her own life, but instead participating in a carefully managed environment shaped by others' expectations. In a particularly emotional statement, she expressed the feeling that she was not fully seen as an individual within her own family narrative. Instead, she felt like a background presence in a larger public story, rather than the central figure of her own life. As the court session concluded for the day, the judge ordered that all remaining audio materials be carefully transcribed and reviewed for the next phase of proceedings. The anticipation in the courtroom grew stronger, as it was clear that more information and possibly further revelations were still to come. By the third day of testimony, the emotional atmosphere had become even heavier. The courtroom no longer resembled a standard legal environment. Instead, it felt like the unfolding of a deeply emotional history being examined piece by piece in public view. This final stage of testimony focused on broader themes beyond individual incidents. It explored how public image, faith, and influence may have intersected with private emotional experiences. Leah described feeling that speaking out carried emotional consequences, not only within her family, but also in relation to the public image associated with her mother's career and ministry. She explained that she often felt responsible for protecting that image, even though she did not create it. Over time, she began to feel that expressing her own truth could be harmful, not just personally, but socially. This led to a suppression of her voice and a growing sense of internal conflict. The most emotional moment came when private journal entries were presented. These writings reportedly reflected her internal emotional state during some of her most difficult years, revealing confusion, sadness, and emotional distress as she tried to make sense of her reality. She also described reconnecting with her father after a long period of separation. That reconnection reportedly changed her understanding of past events, as she realized that many of the beliefs she had been given about him did not fully align with his actual behavior or intentions. This realization deeply affected her. In court, she expressed that the most painful part was not simply discovering misinformation, but recognizing the length of time she had believed it. That emotional impact, she said, was difficult to fully process. Tina Campbell's emotional response during this stage was again intense, and the courtroom atmosphere became extremely heavy. Silence filled the space as the emotional weight of the testimony settled over everyone present. Outside the courtroom, public reaction continued to grow more complex. Some viewed the situation as a cautionary reflection on the pressure of maintaining a perfect public image, while others saw it as a deeply private family matter that should not be judged externally. By the end of the proceedings, the impact of the case extended far beyond the courtroom itself. It became a wider discussion about truth, perception, family responsibility, and the emotional cost of silence. While the legal process may have moved toward conclusion, the emotional story continued to resonate, leaving lasting questions about identity, memory, and healing.